Hi, we're excited to announce the availability of different access levels for our admin API today. First, start at the current state. So up until now, our customers had two options for enabling access to split via the public API. The first option was to restrict everything tightly and create few very powerful admin API keys that were handed to a few number of people. This, of course, creates frustration and bottlenecks for the people who hold the key. The second option was to provide broad permissions to users, which means to give out more powerful keys to users that don't actually need these powerful keys to accomplish their tasks. So this was more convenient and created less of a bottleneck, but was quite risky. The solution to this is to add more granular access control to our public API so that users can get permissions to access only what they need without sacrificing security. In order to do that, we've introduced a new concept called roles for our API keys. A role can grant access to the entire set of endpoints or a specific subset of endpoints. And importantly, an API key can have one or more roles assigned to it. And roles can only be assigned at creation time, at key creation time. They can't be modified at a later time. The second concept is scopes for API keys. And this is a concept that we already had for our admin API, but we've extended it. Before we had organization scope and environment scope. And now we're adding something in the middle called the workspace scope. And the scope defines the reach and breadth of an API key across the whole organization. Let's jump into this. Okay, let's talk about roles first. We've added 8 roles, okay? And each role grants different permissions to resources. And a resource is a grouping of endpoints. So the endpoints that deal with user management, creating users, modifying users, listing users are together under the user's resource, and the endpoints for listing, modifying, creating feature flags are under the feature flags resource. Okay. Now, the most powerful role we've created is the API all granted role. If an API key gets created with this role, the key has access to all endpoints and hence resources in our admin API. It's a very powerful role. Another key role is API key. This is a very specific role, allows for access to the resources in API keys resource. Then we have the API admin role. Keys with that role can create users, read users and groups, but also create objects within a workspace or create new workspaces and environments, traffic types, attributes, entities, and restrictions. A role with a slightly narrower scope is the workspace admin. This allows for creation and management of workspaces, environments, and traffic types, but not users and groups. Now we're getting to the more resource-specific roles. The first one is the API feature flag viewer. As the name implies, it gives the API key that has that role view access to the endpoints in the feature flags resource, and also to the endpoints in change request tags and rollout statuses resources, view-only access. There's a companion role, which is called the feature flag editor, which is slightly more powerful, and in addition to viewing, also allows editing of feature flags, change request tags, and rollout statuses. The final two roles are the segment viewer, as the name implies, allows a key that has this role to use the endpoints in the segments resource for listing and viewing segments and change requests and tags. Finally, there's the companion role called the segment editor, which in addition to viewing also allows the modification of segments, change requests, and tags. Okay, how does this look in practice? So let's jump over to the web console, and first let's create a very powerful key here, an admin API key. Admin API keys created by the web console have the API all granted role, so they are very powerful. Let's call that key global for all environments, create. Important, copy the key because that's the only time you see it in full because of security constraints. Moving over to Postman, I'm going to use Postman for this demo. Postman has this handy concept of variables, and we're adding a variable here for the auth token. Okay, I'm pasting in the new key. Cool. And now we head over to the create an API key endpoint. And we're going to create a new API key with the role flag viewer, feature flag viewer. We're going to give it the role API feature flag viewer. And that's it. Send. And now we have a new key, new API key that has the role feature flag viewer. Add a new auth token here in our variables. Okay. And let's use this new viewer key for the subsequent calls. Let's list the feature flags in the web app workspace. Okay, so it returns three feature flags. Let's check this in the app. Yes, we have 3 flags in the web app workspace. Cool. That's what we expected. Now let's try to create a feature flag with this view only key. Let's call it another flag. Let's create that. And it doesn't work. That was expected because it's a flag viewer key. Cool. Now let's create a new key that has slightly more permissions. Let's switch back to our global key and let's create a feature flag editor key. We give it the API feature flag editor role. And there it is. Copy the key, create a variable for it here in Postman, and use that one. Okay, subsequent calls are using the feature flag editor key now. Okay, again, let's try to create a feature flag with this new key. And as expected, it worked because the key has the right permissions. Also, let's try to list the feature flags. It should be 4 now. And yes, it's 4. That worked perfectly. Okay. So we've talked about the roles. Let's talk about scopes. So the roles you can see in the horizontal dimension here, and the scopes in the vertical dimension. And as explained before, roles define which resources or endpoints an API key has access to, and scopes define in which environment, workspace, or organization they can access objects. So if the scope is global, a key has access to all resources, to all objects in that organization. If the scope is workspace, the key can only access objects, for example, feature flags or segments in the defined workspace. And if it's environment, then the key only has access to objects in the environments that were specified when the key was created. Okay, so with this construct, really interesting and very flexible keys can be created. For example, this here. Um, one can create a role that consists of two roles: the API key for managing API keys, and also workspace admin for creating environments, creating new workspace. So these roles can be stacked. And on top of that, the scope can be defined to be workspace. So new environments could only be created in the given workspace and not globally. So this allows for very fine-grained control over the permissions of an API key. How does this look in practice? Okay, let's switch back over to Postman. First, let's switch back to the key, to the global key. That's the first one here. We need this to create a new API key. And we'll create another viewer key, but this time for the mobile workspace. Okay. Give it the role, your picture back, viewer. And to define the scope, we'll have to add this here, workspace, type workspace, and the ID of the workspace. So this will get from the web console, admin settings, workspace, the mobile app. This is the workspace you want to restrict the key to. Okay. To put this in here. So we're going to create a new API key with the role viewer restricted to the scope of the mobile apps workspace. All right. Cool. That worked. Now, let's save that here. It's another auth token. And use that one. And now we're going to try to list the feature flags in the other workspace, the web app workspace, with this new key that has been defined for the mobile workspace. And that doesn't work because it's the wrong scope. So that's great. We hope you love this new way of creating permissions for app and API keys.